Hey guys, it's Luke Johnson from Noetic. It's a humanities, philosophy, poetry, literature app. And today, in our seminar, our continued seminar of poetry, we have back with us Holly Holt. And I think she enjoyed talking to us so much about Emily Dickinson last week, right? We did just discuss Emily Dickinson, did we not? That she is going to follow it up with another Emily Dickinson poem. And truthfully, Emily Dickinson has become a favorite of mine. As I've gone deeper and deeper into poetry. So I hope Holly gives her analysis of as many Emily Dickinson poems as she wants to, because I can't get enough of her, and I hope you all enjoy it. So I'll stop talking now and let Holly do her thing. Teach me some poetry, Holly.
All right. Well, actually, this poem really connects really well to what we did last week because there was that conversation between us about faith, and I was just like, I'm sure there's something, in Emily Dickinson's poetry. So as I was delving into her poetry, I actually saw several poems dedicated specifically to faith. And I looked into her background as far as, where the faith and the everything comes from. And it actually comes from the fact that her father was a preacher. And that, of course, was connected also back to society. There's actually the poem that I chose for today. It really connects really well with faith as well as science. Now, some people think, okay, no way can faith and science, relate to each other, because you have some people that go, well, I'm very much a Baptist, and then you have the other one going, well, I'm an atheist. And then I was just like, well, okay. There's actually two students in my that I've actually spoken to this week. One is very much into the faith side, and the other one is very much into the science side. So I was like, well, that really well relates very well to the Emily Dickinson poem that I chose. And if you want, I can just go ahead and read you that poem, and I can start my analysis of that poem. And the name of it is Faith is a Fine Invention. It's by Emily Dickinson, of course. It goes, faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see with microscopes are prudent in an emergency. And really with me, I really thought that resonated really well because of the fact, some people say, okay, faith does not line up with science. And what Emily Dickinson, I feel, is saying here is that they can relate to each other, because you can't really have one without the other. Because if you really look into science, there's a realm of faith that has to exist there in order for the, theories and stuff to really work through. And so that's really what I was analyzing this week. And, like I said, the way that they just relate to each other. And back to last week's poem about hope, it really connects very well because of the fact that, the two of them, they both have quotes around the word. So you really think that she's defining both of those words, hope and faith. So.
Yeah, I like this. Can you hear me okay, Holly? Yeah?
I can hear you just fine.
Good. Yeah, I think it's interesting. She speaks of faith as a fine invention and for gentlemen who see. And I'm kind of curious, for instance, like the fact that she employs the word invention to describe faith. Something might make me sort of skeptical that she's saying that faith is really an authentic thing, that it might be something that is not quite real. But I mean, at the same time, we have all sorts of inventions that are the result of scientific processes that are very, very helpful and very, very real and very, very essential in cases of emergency. So I think that's kind of an interesting sort of tension going on there. And I see this, I see this line about faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see. I'm kind of curious what you might think the type of seeing that she thinks is going on with these particular sort of gentlemen who have faith, and why microscopes are to be preferred in the emergency scenarios. I don't know. There's a lot of questions there, and I probably am putting you on the spot about a lot of them, but I was wondering if maybe you could speak to some of those tensions, questions, concerns.
I think really, I mean, it relates all around to science and faith because, I mean, there had to be a sense of faith in science whenever it first started out, because without it, we wouldn't have gotten to where, we are today. And that it's an invention for those who see. I mean, that connects to the fact, that, the way that everything lines up with the concepts of how society was forming during that time. Because some would just say, okay, you've got to believe in one or the other, because you have to consider something like, as far as the origin of species, there were some who said, okay, no way can, one believe in one thing over another, because there has to be a way to line them both up. And it reminds me of a movie I watched about Charles Darwin. His wife was extremely religious, and she really believed that he was denouncing his faith because of the fact he believed so much in science. When in fact he was, I believe that God gives us insight into seeing different things. And, for those who see, really connects into like something as far as, the actual belief that, we've, originated from as far back as, beginning of time, right, practically. But, the invention, I mean, it really, like I said, I mean, that's just one scenario that I've gotten as far as, like Charles Darwin, but I'm sure that there are others, and some people just were like, there's no way, like, science doesn't can relate, and they can exist in the same place, like you can't have faith and you can't have science just working hand in hand, but I mean, if we didn't in the beginning, and even now, I mean, some people say, okay, yeah, I don't believe that there is a greater being, but they can't explain fully like where the cosmos come from. And this actually, I was thinking about this also. Stephen Hawking is actually one who has said that he does not believe that there is a creator. But that doesn't mean, though, that all scientists think the same way. There's some scientists who still believe, that there is a creator, Yeah.
My experience has been, and this is sort of anecdotal, that Hawking sort of aside, that there are, at least in terms of ratios, I think the hard scientists you're never going to get like a plurality of them that believe in any sort of creator or revealed historical truth or something like that. But as you get closer and closer to a structure, a study of the structure of the universe, I feel like you start to see more physicists and scientists find the conclusion of a creator to be somewhat irresistible. Now, there'll still be a minority, but I think they're greater than, say, biologists. I still want to play a little bit with this poem, though, and talking about the nature of that hand-in-hand symbiotic relationship that faith and empirical science may have, and how that is represented here in these 4 lines. The level that faith seems to be working on is for gentlemen who see, and I don't know if that is sort of like for gentlemen who perhaps have some understanding of this wisdom that you made reference to earlier about there being a need to trace back all causes to some sort of eternal reference point that is God. And so that seeing is some sort of orienting compass. Whereas, and then they also seem to know that there is a sort of faith that is needed in order to practice science, right? That faith in the results. I don't know if you've ever seen scientific demonstrations where individuals will, allow a pendulum bowling ball to swing across the room, and they don't flinch when it comes back because they trust and have faith in the laws of science so much, and in the scientific process so much, and how a type of faith is part of the scientific method. Someone I study, Soren Kierkegaard, would make the distinction between these types of faith being sort of like an ordinary faith and sort of an existential involution of the self when we start talking about relating to like divine beings. But whatever science is and whatever it's doing, it seems to be doing something in the case of an urgent physical emergency. And I guess the interesting question is, if we really do have a sort of epic battle between faith and science going on within these fourth lines, are the battle lines neatly drawn, or do you read it more as something where they're just bleeding into one another, where like they're really inseparable and there's this underpinning need for one another?
I really think, though, that it really connects really well with Emily Dickinson, her actually life, because, I mean, it goes into what I read was, she received her first Bible when she was 13 years old, and so for the longest time, she would actually continuously go to church. There's actually some lines that actually go like, some people keep the Sabbath by going to church, others stay at home, and there's actually lines that are connected to one of her poems. And she was also, she also existed during the time when science was on the rise. So I think there was a part of her that was, there's that side of her that says there has to be faith, and then she was like maybe questioning herself, going, okay, well, maybe there's both. And you can actually see it in the lines, because two of them seem more towards that science side, and the others, they seem more towards, the faith side, because it's one thing to see, and it's another thing to actually, work on it, to experience it, And I really think that's connected to her as a person. So
I think that's a great insight. And I think one of the other things that you're pointing out here by paralleling the faith and science here is how she seems to see them from what they are in some way, like that she does by calling faith a fine invention. She's, you would think that she's undermining, you might think that she might be undermining faith in some way, but she never really refers to microscopes as being this, or as microscopes as this emblematic thing, as like this representative of anything more than that which is expedient and prudent. And I guess that's an interesting, I guess one of the feelings I get when I read this and think about it, I mean, this is the first time I've ever seen it, is that there is a sense that like the status of both faith and science might be hanging in the air, that there might be, you might be able to read this one way where she seems sort of agnostic about them both. Because I guess the thing is, and I don't have a deep understanding of Emily Dickinson, but from what I do understand, her relationship with religion was quite complicated, was it not? I mean, I knew she had the father as a preacher, but I think I know there's an Emily Dickinson movie coming out, and the little bit of work I've done on Emily Dickinson before when we've done other lessons and stuff like that is that it seemed like, and I am no expert on this, so I don't want anyone to like quote me on anything. It seems like she was very slow to do public faith professions and acknowledgments, but it seemed like something about that kernel of faith within her childhood remained very personal to her. So much so that it seemed very confusing to the society within the society she was within, whether or not she actually had belief or not. And maybe in her own personal correspondences and throughout the rest of her poetry, we get a greater sense of maybe how she vacillated a lot on her faith commitments. Do you know anything about how she evolved as a religious poet at all?
Well, I mean, I know that she has some that are, like I said, are actually based on, her religion. But I really think most of hers are, just geared towards living itself. And I really think, geared towards her living, there was, of course, that faith, that hope that she always talks about. Then there was the darker side of her where she was really exploring death itself, mortality, just her poetry just seems more to me geared towards just existence itself.
How do you understand? I hope these are not too many questions, but I think that's interesting because I think a lot of people share that perspective of there being a sense of optimism and faith and hope, just in existence itself. And I heard you use it, and you seem to separate it from her religion, whatever her feelings about religion were. I guess, and that's interesting for me because I always tend to think of faith as the best part of religion. But I think there are other people who have this sense of this faith in humanity or this particular attitudinal outlook. How do you understand that in this context, perhaps?
Well, I really think of it as being, the fact alone that it's 4 lines, it tells you, she really wanted to sum it up because she didn't want to explore it too much, and she considers it an invention. She goes into saying it's, it's something that you see, and then she doesn't mention anything about how she would feel about it, how she would consider it. Just 4 simple lines of, here's what God, pretty much she's saying, here's what God gave us. He gave us the ability to see, but sometimes we can't see it. So we have to actually look into science for us to see it. So,
do you think there's anything significant about the fact that she says faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see? I find that kind of interesting that she doesn't. She identifies it with men primarily. Why she wouldn't say something to the effect of mankind, even though that's still sort of, or humanity or something like that. Gentleman seems to be something particular towards the men. I almost wonder if she thinks that faith or organized religion or something like that might be at least might be something that's an invention of men. Did that strike you as odd at all?
Yeah, it did, and I was really thinking, about that time period when she wrote it. What was the sex of the actual scientists? The scientists were mainly, of course, men, and so she was actually saying, that's what she was seeing, was that the men were the ones who were actually experiencing all of this, the religion, the science, everything. So
yeah, there's exclusivity to it, isn't there?
Yeah.
I guess I wonder, and I'm a philosopher by training, so if I wonder if people are coming to me and or coming to our conversation, there's like, oh, I'm just gonna write down what Luke says and and try to get an A on my paper or whatever. I wouldn't recommend doing that. I hope these questions provoke you to pursue these things deeper, but it would seem like to me that because of the masculine hue of these endeavors, of faith and science or whatnot, if she has an element of hesitation about them both, and that's why their status may be in doubt, not only because there are elements of faith involved in both religion and science, but maybe there's something. Maybe you can make the case that there's something, at least at that time with the way that science was practiced, fundamentally oppressive about science. Because, and science is in a constant state of refinement. I think people want to deify it and to turn it into a new form of religion, but it's my personal belief that's pretty wrong-headed, because what we think is good science now is not necessarily going to be good science in the future. And if we look back on, say a lot of the science that was going on at Emily Dickinson's time, I wonder if a lot of those quote unquote scientific findings were always kind to women. I worry about science during that young era excluding a lot of people from the conversation of who is and who is not like a responsible, rational adult. You know, I think about like people that were placed in insane asylums as a result of scientific methodology. Phrenology as a pseudoscience or whatever is something that, you know, a parlor trick that had some sort of esteem and validity to it, or a projected esteem and validity to it. So I don't know. I think there's some tension there with that, and how sociological gender roles may be affecting both faith and science, and why Dickinson may have some trouble with this. I don't know. I'd have to look at what some smart people have said in terms of analysis, but I don't know. I think there's something that can be said about the punctuation too. You know, she seems to go from like 0 to 10 or 0 to 60, whatever metrics you want to use. You know, she talks, faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, but then just 2 lines later, she's exclaiming, in an emergency, you know, that she goes from a pretty calm, what I read is a pretty calm articulation, to something very, very urgent in such a short period of time. I don't know if there's...
Sorry. You'd almost think there's like a ton of sarcasm too, you know, in the fact that, you know, she's saying something so lighthearted and then suddenly she goes, well, an emergency, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing, is like, you know, how authentic is that exclamation? Right? And if she is being sarcastic with that exclamation, what would the, you know, you're better at diagnosing these things than I am. You know, what would that sarcasm, what do you think she's trying to tell us if it is sarcastic?
You know,
is it more of that disbelief in the power of science?
I think so, because of the fact that she's connected so well to what's going on and everything. And, you know, like here's one moment she's talking about faith, but then she's like talking about, you know, science. You know, she's really transitioning from one thought into the next one, you know, and I mean, I would almost say that there is a tone of sarcasm there, especially the fact that she does, like you said, really exclude men in this one. And Emily, one of the main things is, I mean, she never got married, you know. Now, that doesn't say that she didn't have a love life or anything, but, you know, she never married. And one of the main reasons that no one got married back then, of course, you know, as a woman, is because of the fact there was that, you know, I'm going to have to take care of my husband. It's all my property is going to go to him. And, you know, and then there's, you know, that tone of, like I said, the sarcasm comes from the fact that she's connecting those two together and hinting at, you know, how men react on opposite sides of the playing field.
Yeah. What do you think about the choice of the microscope? Do you think that's significant? I mean, when you have a poem so short, I have to imagine every word is chosen with such deliberation. You know, she says, but microscopes are prudent. Do you think she could have chosen anything. She could have chosen a stethoscope. I mean, really, in an emergency, it doesn't seem like a microscope is that urgent, is that necessary in an emergency. Maybe when you need like some lab work or something like that. But in an emergency, I would think if you needed a tool of science, you would need something like a stethoscope or I don't know. I mean, something more immediately placed to.
I really think that the reason she used microscope is because what do you do whenever you use it? You look through it, you know, because you see faith, but then you use a microscope, you know, and you're actually, what are you still doing? You're still using your eyesight. So I really
I
think
think
it's connected. So.
that's a great insight, Holly. I think that's a great insight. Cool. Well, I really enjoyed this poetry selection. I really liked it. It was really delightful to discuss it with you. I think it was very generative. I think we got a lot of questions to further explore, and maybe we take some of these themes with us as we talk about Emily Dickinson some more, or whatever direction you want to go. I'm happy to continue to talk poetry on Friday afternoons with you. It's quite a delight.
Thank you.
But I'll let you decide. We'll talk. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we bring it to a close?
I think I'm good.
Well, thank you for making time for me. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone who has downloaded the Noetic app has benefited from our conversation. What I liked about this conversation, Holly, is how we did it together. You know, I think a lot of the poetry conversations I have on here, because I am such an amateur, I'm very deferential to the other people, and I like that you let me do some work and let me try to sort some things and figure some things out, because you know better than anyone, right? That there's no greater feeling than making the connections on your own than just being lectured at all the time, you know? And I think we all learn differently, and I think you've got a really good teaching style as far as how to encourage your students to be confident enough to try, you know? And that's something I feel like I'm learning from you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to bring this to a close, and hopefully we'll do this again next week.
All right, cool.
All right. Thank you, Holly.